New York is one. London, I mean, people who voted with us in 2009, voting against us, such as Uruguay in Latin America, which is a progressive regime, Malaysia. You can see not only an encirclement, but a shrinkage of the international space and the international support of Sri Lanka. So Geneva is only the most visible of all of this. After Geneva will come the Commonwealth Heads of Government Summit. Now, I'm not saying that there will be a boycott, but Geneva, the vote in Geneva will be fuel, as it were, for those efforts of those who are campaigning against the hosting of the Commonwealth Summit by Sri Lanka. So it will be a great deal of bad publicity. Now, all of you in the corporate sector know that the corporate sector has changed in the 21st century. It is no longer only the bottom line. Consumer opinion counts. And consumer opinion is intimately linked with citizen opinion, because no longer is the individual seen only as a consumer, but also as a citizen. And the opinions of citizens concerning countries, concerning the images of countries, translates itself into corporate behavior. Because no company, certainly in the first world, wants to be seen to go against ethics and opinion within their societies and in the world. So, these negative votes or phenomena, whether it is the United Nations Secretary General's panel of experts report, or the so-called Darusman report, the follow-up report is the Charles Petrie report, the Geneva votes, the demonstrations in Tamil Nadu, the Channel 4 movie, the book by Gordon Weiss, the book by Francis Harrison, all of this cumulatively contribute to a change in the milieu in which Sri Lanka finds itself. And this will impact upon us in terms of foreign direct investment, in terms of export markets, and someday even in terms of tourism. Now, I said there are extra economic factors in what is fundamentally a sound and promising economy that have caused these problems. I cannot list all of them, but I will tell you a little anecdote of a conversation I had with a very brilliant minister, who is no longer minister, a former foreign minister in Singapore, where I was a senior research fellow. And on my way out, we had a long conversation. I returned to the diplomatic service. And one thing that he told me was, he said, Dr. Jayatillake, you know, your country's, your main problem is not the build-up in the Tamil diaspora. It's something else. So I said, what is it? He said, you know, your structure, it's far too top-heavy. It can't last. It can't sustain itself. Because if it's too top-heavy, it will naturally bend. It's bringing everything down. So, the structure is top-heavy. The sharing out of the peace dividend is skewed by extra economic factors. There is what I have called a cartelization of resources, access to resources, and power. There is an infusion of patronage, which was earlier limited to the state sector, but has now begun to touch the private sector, perhaps except for the multinational, the local branch of the multinationals. Now, the seepage of patronage has meant that the mix or the ratio of incentives to disincentives has changed. And overall, performance is affected, productivity is affected. therefore competitiveness is affected. So, because of these extra economic factors, we witness the problems that I set out at the beginning of my presentation. The gap between what we are able to be as an economy and a society and what we are, and also the phenomenon of retrogression in certain areas. Now you know that one of the most important drivers of prosperity is an upwardly mobile and prosperous middle class. This is so in most of the countries of Southeast Asia, and also in India. But that is not really happening now. You have a sense of being caught in a crunch. There are spending cuts in middle class households, and there is a feel bad factor, which of course is the opposite of what you need to fuel consumer demand. Another important factor in a sustainable development at a high growth rate is the role played by the educated young professionals, the educated youth of any community. And societies such as India and China, very different in many ways, have a common policy towards the non-resident Indians or overseas Chinese. There's every effort made to attract them so that they can come back and spend some time and contribute the knowledge that they have accumulated in other parts of the world. You know that in these countries, if one of your parents happen to be Indian or Chinese, you're automatically a citizen. But the very strange attitude that Sri Lanka has now developed towards dual citizenship is a complete disincentive to the kind of integration with the world community that we need and the infusion of skills that we require. Now, if we had a rational policy on dual citizenship, a welcoming policy of dual citizenship, we would then be stakeholders in Western societies. But by being very tight-fisted, we are depriving ourselves of the possibility of having these bridges with the outside world. And this is for extra economic reasons, and it is having an effect on the economy. The final point about the prognostications or the future perspectives I would like to make before I wind up with my policy prescriptions is of a somewhat controversial nature, but I'm going to say it anyway. For the first time in post-independence Sri Lankan history, you have the intrusion into the marketplace, into the economy, of ethnic and ethno-religious forces and factors. I speak especially of the so-called halal boycott. This intrusion means a distortion of the functioning of the marketplace due to completely irrational, non-economic reasons. We all know that you cannot succeed as an economy unless you have an integrated base of production, an integrated market, an integrated workforce, and an entrepreneurial class which does not have to fear which ethnicity or religion they happen to be born into. You do know that Singapore is 70% Chinese, but that means nothing in terms of the composition of the cabinet or the functioning of the Singaporean economy. Now, the intrusion of ethno-religious fanaticism and the new and almost unique factor of visible patronage or association with it at the highest levels of state officialdom cannot but have a debilitating and divisive and dysfunctional impact within the economy. So, taken together, because of these extra economic and I would say frankly irrational factors of a top-heavy structure, of cartelization of resources and power, and of the intrusion with an element of state patronage, of ethno-religious fanaticism and fundamentalism into the functioning of the economy. I do not see a happy prospect in the coming year. And on top of that, you could add the signals that will go out to what is a globalized, integrated and sensitive market, global market based on perceptions. The signals that will come out of Geneva and in the run-up to the Commonwealth Summit. If we were talking about next year, which we are not, then I would talk about the Indian elections of next year. But that is outside the purview of our conversation this evening. I will conclude with my policy prescription. My policy prescription is as unorthodox as the rest of my presentation. As a political scientist, I tend to see things in structural and systemic terms rather than in the way that most people see them. And I see most of the negatives in Sri Lanka today stemming from one basic or fundamental factor, and that is that the political marketplace is far less competitive than the economic marketplace. The political marketplace is not competitive, and it is not competitive not because there is a dictatorship, though there are tendencies towards authoritarianism. It is not competitive because one of the two major firms has gone into implosive collapse. It's been dying for a long time, and you in the corporate sector know that if you had a firm, if you were shareholders of a firm that kept making losses for 18 years, you'd do something about the CEO. Tell me a firm that doesn't. I mean, such a firm is suicidal. I mean, it would be driven to the wall by the market forces. And I have not understood why the corporate sector, in its own interest, has not played the role that the corporate sector plays in many other parts of the world, and at least supported the creation of a rational, viable, marketable, consumer-friendly alternative enterprise, political enterprise. And nobody is asking the Sri Lankan private sector to overthrow the government. I mean, leave the government alone. The government can be taken care of if there is competition. Then you will find the same arrogant power wielders behaving very, very differently if they know that there is competition. I mean, you know what it's like in the marketplace, in the economic marketplace. What if one company has a monopoly? That is the situation you have in the political marketplace. And unless there is a reflation through rebranding, reconfiguration of the alternative government, or unless, as happens in the corporate sector, the most dynamic elements move out and form a new, far more competitive enterprise with a new brand, the political marketplace will not become competitive again. And if it does not become competitive, there will be no way of reversing the negatives that we see. And those negatives, I must caution you, involve the possibility of violent civic conflagration, which can set the economy back, which can blow it off course for decades, and can set in motion a spiral that leads the world to to isolate us, to draw away from us. Our economy is vulnerable to that. You will have a downward spiral, and that would be a very grim scenario indeed. So, that is my policy prescription. Restore equilibrium to the polity by making the political marketplace competitive once again. It's a worthwhile investment to make. Thank you very much.